Welcome, everybody. All right. Thanks, y'all, for coming out tonight. It's a pleasure to see you all. Welcome to our 2024 Naturalist Journeys program. My name's Sean. I'm with North Branch Nature Center here. I just have a couple of quick thank yous to say and a couple of quick announcements before I turn things over to Kimberly. I first and foremost want to thank all of our sponsors that make Naturalist Journeys possible so that we can make this free to the public for as many as we can fit in this room all winter long. Especially thanks to Hunger Mountain Co-op and 802 Coffee as our lead sponsors as well. So as some of you may have read, our Naturalist Journeys series this winter is kind of taking a little bit of a different approach than previous seasons. They're really kind of focusing on climate change, but climate change in kind of creative ways, or looking at ways in which different activities and systems impact climate change in ways that we may never have considered before. So last week we heard from Ben Goldfarb all about beavers and their role in climate resiliency and flood resiliency. We're going to hear all about sheep grazing today.
Are they taped?
Yes. In fact, the next thing on my list. So anyway, we have lots of great programs coming up this winter. If you found this one, you've probably found the rest of them, so come to them all. And there's a poster out on the table that has all the dates and the details for those, but check out our website. And on our website, you'll find recordings of all of the presentations as well. So all of our programs are live streamed, knock on wood, live streamed, and are also recorded and available. So if you can't come in person, or if it's a virtual program to begin with, you can always find the recordings on our website a couple days after the fact. And we keep them there for forever. So you can go and watch the whole series from years ago as well, if you'd like. I want to draw your attention to the amazing gallery that you're sitting within right now, the All's Wool That Ends Wool group art show that Kimberly will maybe tell you a little bit more about. I'm not sure, but make sure you look for Kimberly's pieces in the show as well, and she's been instrumental in making this possible. But it's no coincidence that tonight's program is happening while this show is up here. So before you leave, make sure you take a look at the gallery. So we have plenty of time for questions at the end of the program, so please go ahead and hold your questions till the end, because we'll have lots of time for that after Kimberly's presentation. And after at the conclusion of the talk, if folks want to scoot out, you're welcome to. We'll take a quick second for those to escape if you don't want to stay for the Q&A. But otherwise, stick around and we can have we'll keep it going. So, without further ado, please help me welcome Kimberly Hagen.
So I do first want to just call attention to all the art pieces on the wall. So this was in 2018, I received a grant from the American Sheep Association. I had this idea that about using wool as an art piece in restaurants because it's so noisy. And I know a lot of people talk about how, it's hard to even talk in a restaurant because a lot of them, it seems like they like the hard surfaces, the chrome and glass and all that, so it makes a lot of noise. So I had this idea, well, maybe if we could put up wool as such a great sound softener that if we had it artistic, that maybe they would be interested in having rotating shows of pieces of art. So I wrote this grant, and we were awarded the money, and I contacted, I sent out a message out through the sheep telegram, and said, if you're interested in being part of this, let me know. And so I was contacted, I think I had 18 people. And they were each given a panel of wool. This was the background, this was the size. And they could do whatever they wanted with it. And they had 1 year. So the goal was that they were supposed to go on display and travel around the state. And what happened was they got to the Manchester, the Kildene Center, the Visitor Center, which is quite large. And they did a whole display with showing the old tools for processing wool. It was really great. And it was there for 2 weeks and the pandemic hit.
Oh.
So they sat there for a year and a half with nobody seeing them.
Oh.
So it's really sad. So I, once when it was over, when we were able to function again, I took the display down after a couple weeks, and I started contacting the places that we were scheduled to go, and either they were shut down or they had such a long list of other exhibitors they just couldn't fit. So I've been trying for 2 years to get this exhibit back up somewhere. And I was here looking at something else one day. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, I started talking to Chelsea, who works here, and she's a fiber artist. And I started talking to her. She said, "Why don't we do it here?" So we planned this. Not all the ones that were in the original show are here. A lot of them are not. There's some new ones. But the large panels are all from the original show. So anyway, they're here until the end of March. And you know, if you know anybody who owns a restaurant, you can tell them they can come and take a look and get some ideas. I think, you know, what I found is all these people were very eager to be part of this and, you know, share their artwork and to do more. So it'd be great. All right, onward. Now I'm going to go a little bit away from art, and we're going to go to a little more of the science part of this. So, as Sean said, I guess I have to stand kind of close to this because that's what...
You're fine where you are.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, because I don't want to stand in front of these people. Okay, so I want people just to kind of make some connections here that are kind of important to us here in Vermont. So that picture of that water, that's my road this summer. In July. We were going in and out by canoe for a few days. But anyway, I wanted to put all this together. So agriculture, it's the leading cause of climate change. It's the largest economic activity with the production, processing, and distribution of food. So I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but it is. And all the fossil fuels that power the equipment to do all that. It's responsible for half of all the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. Methane, or as they say in England, methane, nitrous oxide, the rice paddies, ruminant livestock, and poorly managed manure are responsible for 76%. Manufacture of agrochemicals and fertilizers is way up there. And the most significant is the release of the carbon that's held in the soil through the deforestation, the land clearing, the plowing, and the soil tilling. So because it's leading cause, it has to be a big part of the solution. And all my colleagues, the people I've worked with for the last couple of decades, you know, have really dedicated themselves to trying to figure this out. A lot of questions, people sharing their, you know, collecting data, sharing it, and zeroing in. Conferences all the time. I spent a lot of time in the winter going to multiple conferences where we could share data, trying to figure out who is what's the worst contributor and what is the source of it. How do we change that? Can we change it? And what would be the most effective way to bring about that change? And who would know what that change should be? To begin with, we know that we've lost, this is the number one reason we've lost carbon out of the soil. It's from the land clearing and the tillage, the plowing that we've done since we started practicing agriculture. And it continues to this day.
Oh, wow.
That's the Connecticut River, emptying into Long Island Sound after tropical storm. That's Long Island Sound. Yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? That was Vermont's topsoil. So just a quick look at the carbon cycle. There's a couple different ways that it moves, but the one that's probably the most, see if I can make this work. Oh, yeah, this is probably the most impactful right now that we're all feeling is the burning of those fossil fuels. And then trying to get that atmospheric carbon dioxide back down into the soil. There's 5 great pools. There's the oceans, the atmosphere, the lithosphere, which is Earth's crust, the biosphere, which is where we function and live, and then the soils. And so the carbon's constantly moving between these, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. So what we've figured out is that if we want to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere, the two choices we have really are to cut the emissions and to sequester carbon. Some people are now saying that forget even thinking about cutting emissions. We can't even come close. Let's just focus on sequestering. But I think it's kind of everything. I think we have to kind of not throw anything off the table. So using less fossil fuels, all that machinery, the tilling and cultivating, less manufacturing of artificial synthetic fertilizers, less plowing and tilling and subsoiling. And then we also want to get sequestering carbon going. So collecting all that data and fine-tuning and finding all this minutia about what's happening where, what chemicals are going where, and how that's moving through the, our world, getting that into understanding it, how it's happening, is a whole other game. And even for scientists and people who work in this sometimes. But what we have figured out for agriculture is that the 2 big places we have are storing it in the above ground biomass. I'm sure you've all heard that, we all know this about trees and the plants, and then getting it back into the soil. But how do we get it there? And then keep it healthy, and then build additional soil. So what's the farmer supposed to do? You give them all this data and all this information, and they just kind of throw up their hands like, so what? So where I worked for the last couple of decades is on the issue of pasture and grazing. This is what I did in my professional work. So 70% of the world's farmland is pasture. That number fluctuates depending on who's collecting, but it's around there, between 65 and 75, I would say. And in a lot of places, it's really the only way to use that piece of land, whether it's hilly or it just isn't very good soil, it can't really sustain crops of any sort. It would be impractical to try and grow crops there, so So a lot of cultures around the world survive on just grazing. They get their meat and milk and fiber. But it also recycles nutrients, and that's the part that's really important. So the big question in the grazing world has been, for the last several years, is can grazing and good pasture management sequester significant amounts of carbon? And just trying to figure out how to measure it has taken, and we're still not there. We still haven't quite figured it out. The biggest project is out in California called the Marin Carbon Project. They've done a lot of work on this. And I haven't seen the latest papers on it because I'm retired. So it may have come a little bit further than it was when I was still working on this. But it's pretty confusing. But we do know that keeping the ground covered is pretty important. And that grazing pasture land can do that. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. As you can see from these 2 pictures, these were from 2 different farms in Vermont that I worked with. So you can see that this is grazing, and this is grazing. So obviously we're going to have some really big differences with the carbon. So the top one, which is the old style, where you had maybe 1 or 2 pastures, and the cows would come in, get milked, and then you would turn them back out. And sometimes halfway through the summer, you put them in a different one. Or some places it was a day and a night pasture. They'd go out to one in the day, and then at night they'd go to a different one. And then we have this other one of set paddock rotations. So this is where you, a farm will probably set up semi-permanent different smaller paddocks, and they will move them around in a set schedule to those different places. The goal is that you want the animals to graze the best part and then get them off of there, so that, because what happens is what we see here, when they keep, what happens is the animals turn into what I call dessert eaters. So they keep wanting to eat the choicest bits. And when they keep doing that, they eventually kill the plant, because they chew off the top. That plant has to go down into the root reserves that it has, that it's got to do regrowing with. And if they have to keep doing that again and again, eventually kills the plant, because it has nothing left. So what happens is we get bigger and bigger patches of bare soil. So then we have heavy rain, heavy precipitation. That's what it goes down the slope into the streams and joins with all the others, and then goes to Long Island Sound. Later on, we came up, this is probably the one that we're finding is the best. It's called the adaptive multi-paddock. So this one is based on this system is based on, you look at what's happening with the plants and you match it with what's going on with your animals. So, a farmer can go put his animals out there, and if he sees that the place that they were going to go next, or that the place they're in, they're taking the vegetation down too much, or it needs more of a rest, he moves them off. So they might be in there an hour, they might be in there 2 hours, and they might be in there for a day, and then they move them. The idea is that you're matching what's going on with the needs of the livestock with the plants. So we had all kind of hoped back in 2015, when all this was really getting going, that all this was going to start bringing carbon into the soil. And it's turned out that grazing really didn't do as much as we thought it would. We have found that, and the problem is that we still haven't found a really good way to measure it either. So the way we do it is by proxy, which is we look at how much organic matter has been added to the soil. So if you're keeping it covered and you're grazing right, you're adding good organic matter to it, and it's building soil. But it just didn't pan out to do quite as much as we thought it would, which has been a big disappointment. But the thing that's really that does kind of save it is that there's so much grassland in the world that even though it's a small amount, it's a lot when you put it all together. So the total of it. So they have done some estimates. I found a couple of different numbers today when I was looking for sort of the latest. One was that 16.34 gigatons, and that was from the drawdown. And I have there, I don't know if you're familiar with drawdown. I put there the book on the back table. There's all kinds of books back there you can take a look at. Drawdown was this worldwide collection of scientists taking a look at what were the top 100 things we can do to draw down carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is um, in Mongolia, and you'll see there's an article on the back table. This is the cashmere goats, which cashmere has become quite the item in the fashion world, and unfortunately, it's causing some real devastation in China and Mongolia. You can see some of the bare ground here. It's getting pretty severely overgrazed. There's another picture too. This one is also from Mongolia. You can see it gets eaten down pretty hard. So this is one of our favorite slides that we put together, the team I worked with when I was at Extension. This just shows you the difference. So there are 4 different treatments here. And these jars show what happens when we do a rainfall simulation. So if you look at this first one, this one is a strip that is tilled. And the front jar is the water that comes off the surface, and then in the back is the water that comes goes through the soil and the grasses and is in the back. So this one had been tilled. This one was well-managed pasture, but it was very compacted. So you can see there's quite a bit of water that's, but it's not full of soil. It's actually a little bit clearer than this one. This one is well-managed pasture, which was uncompacted, and you can see that it held on to the water. Not much of it came off. It absorbed it. And then this is a continuous corn tillage, and you can see how it's full of soil. So what we had this, a sprinkler was set up, and it would do rain simulation on top of this, and then you could see how the water drained through. So I just wanted to put in a word here about, this is one of the more promising areas. It's rated number 9 on the drawdown list. So they have found that just by combining pasture with woodlands, we actually can boost that carbon sequestration immensely. It's a very promising field. So on the far, that one over there. So this, believe it or not, these are walnut trees, and this is out on Shelburne Farms. And I was working with them. They had been mowing between the trees, and so we had some conversations, and now I got them to consider grazing, and they are now doing that. Animals. So a lot of things have to come into play to make this work. One of the things that worked on this was that, especially once the trees get to a certain size, livestock don't bother walnut trees too much. They have a very strong smell, and they just don't like them. There's a few different species like that. And then the other thing is it also depends on what your goals are for that piece of forest. So for a long time it was a big, and there's still a lot of people who feel very strongly about this, that you don't combine animals and woodlands. So it's been several years of conversation to sort of make this happen. But it's slowly coming. There's more and more of it going on. In some countries they've always done that, especially like Spain and Portugal. They're well known for, they've been doing this for 4,000 years with their the pigs and for the pork that they raise in the cork forests, and it's a very special ham that they have and has a special flavor. But there are certain places where it's been going on forever. Here, the outlook has always been that the woodlands were for timber, for raising a crop of timber. But if that's not your goal, or if you've taken the timber trees out and it's sort of a second growth, what we were finding is that there's more and more demand for animals to be able to go into the woodland areas because it's getting so hot in the summer, and they need some relief. So if you have a place where the good timber's been taken out and you just have shrubs, what we find is that for the animals, when they're eating these low-growing shrubs, it actually balances out and negates all the methane, especially if they eat a lot more of the broad leaves. So there's so much we still have to learn. I mean, there's just, anyway, I just wanted to put that in there. So back to the adaptive multi-paddock, which we call the AMP, this really mimics the old, what happened here well before we started doing domesticated livestock. What happens is the migratory herds would come through. So all those grasses would grow, and then this giant herd would come with just an intense impact, be in an area for a short period of time, and then they were off and away. And that area usually had a year, maybe 2 years to regrow. And all those nutrients were, the animals would eat the vegetation and then defecate, and then they were out of there, and they're moving those nutrients across the landscape. So it's a really important thing, and that's how we, built up, all the carbon, in the Midwest and the prairies was, how many years of that. And the soil microbes, which are very important. Oh, one thing I do want to point out too is just increasing a 1% increase in organic matter on 1 acre can hold an additional 27 to 29,000 gallons of water. So this is really important as we're dealing with excess water. It's really important that we build up the organic matter in our soils. So without grazing animals, people always say, well, why don't we just take livestock off the landscape? Because I think a lot of people are very disturbed by, we see pictures of feedlots. And I'm not here to advocate any particular diet for anybody. My interest is just in getting the ground healthy. So if you think about I've seen this in a lot of farms that have gone out of business and are no longer farming. What happens is all the plant material dies and it falls over, and then it shades the ground underneath, and that stays cold in the spring because the sun doesn't get down there. So it gets harder and harder for new growths to come up through that, and we start getting larger and larger patches of bare soil. And that's what we don't want to have happen. We want all of that soil, something growing in it and holding on to it. The other thing that happens is we get a lot of monocultures happening that way, and also all the diversity. You see a change in the insects, birds. It really goes into sort of a monocultures and a lot less. They just don't feel alive as they do when you have grazing animals moving through there.
Kimberly, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
The magic ingredient in that whole thing is manure.
Yes. Yes.
That is, the livestock, the ruminants are fermenting the plant material. They're basically composting it rapidly inside them, converting it to manure. They put it out on the ground, and it is rapidly taken up by soil microbes. So manure is critical to this.
Very critical. And we used to go, Bruce and I worked in different agencies, but we worked a lot together. And one of the first things we do when we go to check out a pasture is you pick up those patties and you flip it over and you can see the microbes. And the healthier your place is, they are already breaking it down within hours. And there's very specific insects that do different parts of that manure. And they take it right down into the soil, a lot better than any human tool can do. They do it, the dung beetles, they can dig these little tunnels and they take it right down deep into the root zone where it needs to be. So if we follow that carbon, Those grasses, the shrubs, and the trees, they all absorb that carbon dioxide. The sheep consumes that vegetation, and they convert it into protein, and one of those proteins is wool. And the composition of wool is 50% carbon, 24% oxygen, 17% nitrogen, 7% hydrogen, and 4% sulfur. So, there's your rug. And that's why it's so important. And you can replace wool rug with wool sweater. There's a company now in Reno, Nevada making insulation. It's a beautiful product. There's more and more in over in Germany and France. They are doing upholstery, just incredible. They're making room office dividers with wool. I mean, they're putting it into everything. So you're sequestering that carbon as long as that for the life of that. And wow, pretty incredible. And then it returns to the soil at the end of its time, and that carbon goes back to the soil. Thank you, Ruth. And just a little quick one here. I just wanted to show you that we're also going back to an historical practice. You can see a long time ago, lawns were mowed in famous places. And now Amazon is doing it.
With goats.
With goats, yes. And thanks to all my friends and scientists that I've drawn on, there's a lot more, but these are just, and a lot of the books that I've used over the years are in the back on that table, as well as the wool rugs. All right, questions, and I'm sure there are questions.
I have two quick questions. At the very beginning, you said, "This is my road." I'm wondering where you live.
Oh, I live in Putnamville.
Okay.
So the bridge that goes over the river there.
Yep.
Yeah, it came up over the bridge.
Wow.
And then on the other side, but just a little bit further down the road, the river came up over the banks. So.
My second question is, what is subsoiling? One of the slides mentioned subsoiling.
Yeah. Do you want to explain that, Bruce?
So if you think of, well, most people think of tillage, you think of a moldboard plow or a disc barrow, which are common items. And they only go about 6 to 12 inches deep, depending on what exactly you're doing. But somewhere like 8 inches is it. So those are sort of standard tillage that work on the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. Subsoiling goes deeper than that. So it's basically, they're usually a sort of hook-shaped thing that goes below that level down to maybe as much as 24 inches. And you do that because years and years and years of driving across the thing with any kind of equipment or any animals will pack the soil down, compact it, and the subsoiling is to bust that layer up to loosen those deeper layers of the soil. But it also lets a lot of air into it, same as tillage in the upper part does, which results in breaking down the carbon.
We found a lot of old farms that there's a hard pan that you hit. And one of my colleagues that I worked with, he found that just driving over damp grounds just with a tractor has 10 times the compaction than dry. So you can imagine on some of these farms where they went over and it's like concrete over those spots.
So I know you mostly focus on sheep. Of course, we've got, there's millions of cattle and sheep elsewhere. I mean, I think about someplace maybe like New Zealand or Australia, places that have way more sheep than we're seeing in this country. How is this study being done worldwide. I mean, kind of, there must be areas of the world that they're not thinking about it. And are there, and what about Mongolia or China, or, how widespread is the concerns and the ideas being, disseminated?
It's worldwide. I mean, there are people everywhere, from Burkina Faso in Africa to New Zealand working on it. But there's a lot of places where they aren't as well. And I just had a thought there when you were saying that, something I wanted to mention. I mean, one of the sad things, like in Mongolia, is here's a nomadic people, the Kashmir goat people. They were very nomadic and moved around the landscape, which you couldn't ask for anything better. I mean, it was so perfect for that landscape. It's arid, so dry, so nothing grows fast, so people have to keep on the move. And then the government has pushed them onto small, every family got, I think it's an acre. So it puts the pressure on them because they need to sell a lot of cashmere to meet their family's needs. But they gave everybody an acre and they built a little brick house for them. So they put as many animals as they possibly can, and what eventually happens is they have no more grass, so then they have to buy feed. So it's pretty destructive. Some of the policies that some governments do, not respecting what the indigenous or the culture of the people in place. And the same thing of the Sami in the Nordic areas. They go across country borders. They cross back and forth with the reindeer herd, which is their livelihood. But the same thing. There's been a lot of, although it's much better there. I mean, governments there have in the past they did not, but they do now. They work with them to support them.
But in a country like, am I under the right impression that New Zealand and maybe Australia are some of the larger sheep producing countries, and are they pretty much getting on board with...
Oh yeah, Australia's, I think, much further. Wouldn't you say? I would say they're way far ahead of us in terms of working on this. Yeah.
So one of the funny things is that ask where the sheep industry is in the whole agricultural sector. And the U.S. is a small player in sheep, but Australia and New Zealand both countries had large wool businesses up until the time the Chinese decided that it was cheaper to make garments out of plastic and they weren't going to make everyone wear wool Maui suits, and the market disappeared overnight, virtually. It's like 1 year it was there, they were buying hundreds of thousands of, millions of tons of wool, and then they weren't. And so in both Australia and New Zealand, the number of sheep dropped dramatically, like to 20% or so of what it had been before that. In Australia, in New Zealand, it's coming back actually. They did a wholesale switch to dairy. But then they had trouble with dairy, with the market in China, and so that's kind of slowed down, and some of the sheep are back. But in Australia, it's kind of the same. Their environmental rules come and go, and depending on how droughty it is, things are good or not good. And they have serious, when they have a drought, they have a drought, and nothing grows for large parts of what's their agricultural area. But interesting, in terms of general, New Zealand is not a very big country, but it's very diverse, and a lot of the sheep today are in the drier areas of that, but they have been in the past in fairly moist areas as well. So the way they were managed and the way they are managed is different in different parts, depending on the particular climate in that area.
But I would say that, and that's the other part. You'll see some of the books back there that I've got is, and that's what this whole show is about too. Is that what we're finding now is that because China did that, and we went to full hog into, well, that was a bad expression, but we really shifted to plastic for clothing. And it literally was overnight. I mean, it was, and same thing happened here with the sheep farmers here. I mean, everybody just dropped, the numbers dropped like crazy because everything, our carpets, upholstery, everything now is made out of plastic. But now that we're finding that the plastic has permeated into even our food because it's moved right up the food system, there's not a drop of ocean water now that they have found that doesn't have plastic in it. And so that goes up the food chain. So we're literally eating plastic. It's in everything. I mean, the most remote people on the planet, they have found in their blood, they have found flame retardant in plastic. So, the excuse up to now has always been, well, it's so much cheaper, But I think the point has come, where is it really cheaper? I mean, we're really paying for it in healthcare costs. So hopefully wool's going to come back. Yeah, Carolyn.
I have two questions. One, I just wanted to hear about solar panels for seeing sheep and how that fits into what you're talking about. And the other thing, I just wanted to mention, I was in Mongolia like 20 years ago, and they were grazing everywhere. I didn't see them in smaller acreage, but so much overgrazing I noticed way back then. And when you tried to like wash your hair or something in the creeks, it smelled like poop. But it made me think, and I'm wondering if there's also an effort on the other end of some sort of certification for something that's more sustainable raised or sustainable grazing practice, kind of like a getting a label on a product that I'm not just buying a sweater from Land's End that's cashmere, but I'm buying something that's raised with sustainable.
And there are. Probably the most well-known one is GOTS, GOTS. But there's a few others too. And it's becoming more and more people are becoming more aware of that and really trying. The North Face, Patagonia really started. He really was the first one to try to make wool into their clothing line. And he went and worked with the shepherds in Argentina and started this whole product line with using the wool from there and using the indigenous people who knew how, they lived. They don't use fences there. They're just on the move. But unfortunately, it was a really sad story. Someone from the PETA group got on one of the crews, and he filmed, because when these people they're way out, they're very remote regions. There's nothing out there. So when an animal breaks its leg, you use it. You slaughter it, and you cook it, and that's your food. And so he had a camera he didn't show anybody, and he filmed this, and then it went viral, and so he shut down the whole operation. So I felt kind of mad about that, because it's like, come on, you have a big name, and you could have pushed back on this, but you didn't. But the North Face has kept going, and they are actually working really hard. They have it's called the beanie. The North Face beanie was their first project. So it was the very first thing they did, and it's completely all organic wool, raised with, people got fair wages, the whole, everything. And it's this wool beanie that you can get. But they're hoping to, expand. But that was a start.
GOTS?
Yeah, GOTS. Yeah, I forget what it stands for. That's an acronym, but I can't remember.
And the other question was about just the solar panels. That's been something that's promoted to graze animals under solar.
Right. That was a project I started when I was at Extension. We first started talking with some of the solar panel array owners. The first project we got going it's a one on Route 7 in New Haven, Open View Farm, and it was our test case. They had a herd, a flock, because they had goats, but then they transitioned to completely to sheep. And I forget, but it was the first project that was done in the state. And we divided it up. We figured out a way to, because the thing that's nice about the solar arrays is by law they have to have a 12-foot perimeter fence around it. So that really makes a big difference. So they rotate their animals inside that, and it had originally planned to be, I think it was supposed to be 35 acres, but the town and the zoning committee there, they had them reduce it to 17 acres. So they condensed it to be pretty small. But it worked out really nice. It was, no one knew what to expect. We were all kind of like, well, let's see how this goes. And it actually turned out wonderful. I mean, I was a little on the fence because it was set down right in the middle of this prime agricultural hayfield. It was, and I was going, ugh. But it turned out great because that was one of the first really hot, dry summers that we had there in Addison County. The animals had a place to go to get out of the sun, and which kept the vegetation from growing underneath them, which we have found out at Oregon State and Cornell. They've done research on that, and they have found that by keeping the vegetation, with the animals keeping the vegetation eaten down, it makes the air circulate and it keeps the panels cooler. So it's a win-win for everything. The problem in Vermont is we don't have, all of our solar fields tend to be pretty little, they're small, and it's so hard to get, the backlash for putting up, no one wants them in their backyard. So it's had a lot more success over in New York State. They have I worked with the folks over there for a few years. They have a whole organization. It's called the American Solar Grazing Association now. And they have huge areas of solar arrays. And so someone can bring like 50 sheep to a solar array and they can be there for, a month. And that makes a big difference. Yeah. But I think it's a win-win.
So one of the things about it is there's two things that are different between New York State and Vermont in this case. One is the regulations that the state requires on these, and the other is the ownership of the solar panels. And in both cases, the ownership, for whatever reason, and I favors this. They think this is good for their public PR. The people who own the ones in Vermont don't seem to care. And in the regulatory, in New York, the state, I don't know the details of what it is but they encourage it. In Vermont, they don't. So basically, there's not much interest by the owners of the solar panels in Vermont, while in New York State, in Connecticut now, actually, there is.
We've had almost every single project we've done, it's been a hard lift to make it happen. Yeah, unfortunately.
Presented a bunch of stuff that we could do differently to reduce emissions from grazing livestock. Have there been any estimates on the percentage reduction in emissions by adopting best practices?
Yeah, there are a lot of estimates, but what they find is that there's such a wide difference between where you are geographically, the soil type, the type of animal that you're doing it with. There's so much variability, so it's really a wide range. Also, just to say that it does, regardless, it does, even though it might be a small amount that it's sequestering, it can go to pretty high amounts depending on the place and the situation. And then if you add trees into it and shrubs, it really goes up.
Second question, I assume cotton doesn't have the same effect of sequestering as the net effect of cotton.
Yeah, probably not, because you have to till each year. So one of the things that's really interesting that's going on, that Patagonia is actually supporting is there is a lot of research going on for perennial crops, so you don't have to plow it up. And of course, cover cropping has become a really big practice, but we still don't have nearly as much as we should. I still get horrified when I drive through Addison County sometimes in the middle of the winter and all that soil is just bare soil, just exposed. But one of the things that Patagonia is supporting is the Land Institute developed a perennial wheat. So you can cut it each year, but you don't have to plow up. The kernels are still pretty small, but we have a plot here in Vermont, out in Shelburne, at the Meach Cove Farm. There's several acres planted down to Kernza, it's called. So, you know, the research continues on that. They're trying to make it so it makes a bigger kernel. So they're making I think it's a beer that you can buy that supports the work.
And you can donate to the Land Institute.
And you can donate to the Land Institute, of course, which is, they've done tremendous work, yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you see any increase, any interest in increasing sheep in Vermont.
Sadly, it's gone the other way.
Oh.
But that's because it is so difficult. The wool market disappeared overnight. It's worthless. I mean, most people now it's in a heap out on the back 40, right? I am working on another project that I'm hoping, you know, we've had to rebuild the whole supply chain. It was completely gone. It went to China. China went and bought up everything. So they have all the big machines. And we've had to rebuild it in this country. So it is happening, but very, very slowly because there's so little money directed that way. The other part that's difficult is that even though, I mean, I work with 3 young people who are still doing sizable farming operations with sheep. One of them, they couldn't afford land, so their business model was they were trying to graze old farms. You know, they would take their flock around to different places and graze other people's property. The other one, a young woman, she's doing that for people who want their, you know, they might have some big fields that they want eaten down and they don't want to mow it, so they hire her to come. She's going to, we just got awarded some funding. She's going to do a ski area this summer. And we're going to try and, you know, instead of them using big machines on those really fragile, you know, there's no soil up there. So you think of these big heavy machines mowing up there, and it's, you know, so this is going to be interesting. Bolton Valley's wanted to do it for years, but there's just so many challenges with trying to make it happen. One of the things so the reason we're getting awarded this money is to try a new technology, which is no fence. So it's a virtual fence. So the animals wear a collar, and they get trained to a sound, and they stay within an area. So our first trial was this last summer. We worked with beef cattle up in Hardwick on a farm up there. And it took us half a day to train the cows. And they figured it out within a half a day. And then the owner, you know, he kept them he had a perimeter fence, but he could move them in small areas within that. And then he took them out to where he finally was ready. He felt like they were ready, and he put them out on this remote pasture. And then they got hit with all the rain and the floods. So it worked out because he couldn't get to them. Both ways out of his farm were completely washed out, so he couldn't get to them. He could draw the pasture on his phone, and he could direct the cows to where to go. And he could see where the wet area was, where they were standing water, so he could direct them around that so they wouldn't go through it. To me, that was sold it right there. I mean, but I will tell you, it has been a very heavy lift getting the funding to try that. It has taken a lot of work. And we're hoping this year to be able to do it with sheep and goats, the small ruminants. So we'll see if we can make it work.
A couple of things about supporting local sheep would be the Sheep and Wool Festival in October 5th and 6th in Tunbridge, Saturday and Sunday. And we do have some mills that have come online recently, Junction Fiber Mill, down in White River Junction. They have their own line of yarn, and it's available at Notion right downtown. They also do custom processing. Bobolink yarn is another yarn that is available commercially. That is Vermont yarn. And there is a Sheep and Goat Association. And so if you go through and you look at your clothes and you realize how much of it is made out of petrochemicals, you can think personally about switching away from that to the extent that you can. So there are ways that you don't have to own sheep to be able to support the sheep industry and tonight's discussions.
There's also a new mill up by the airport in Berlin.
Aurora.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was the machinery that was over. Yeah.
I have a question and an extended comment. What the question was coyotes and sheep and all the headaches of grazing. And then the other thing was, as you know, I'm an upholsterer, and
And Ellie upholstered a chair in my house using the wool from my sheep. It's a beautiful chair.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is alternative uses for wool. And certainly in my business, I would love to never have to buy another piece of foam for the rest of my professional life. And even, the horsehair stuffing that I use, that's coming from South America. There are lots of things that I could, I think, replace with wool. But it would take some testing, and I don't know if there's, I think this would be, we'd have to dream up how to do it. I'd have to literally invent how to replace this awful crap with wool. But it seems to me because it would be, as we've talked, much less processing required. It really doesn't have to be batting, let alone spun. So it could be a little bit like the wool insulation product. It's a way to use wool in a way that uses less processing. And so anyway, I'm thinking about that, and I don't know if anybody else has any ideas or comments on that.
Well, we did
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to do, you talk amongst some Libras and stuff about in futons, and I was curious if you had learned anything more about that, because you had this great idea of doing
I have made some wool stuff mattresses, and they were completely successful, and I actually want to start doing it. And there are places where you can get them. France, you can get them.
Yeah.
People already spend quite a bit of money on, and that's with all this business with the PFAS and all these horrible things. You're spending a third of your life on a foam mattress. And I think people, even if they were going to spend twice as much, a wool mattress, then you maybe have for the rest of your life.
So we did it in 2017. A group of us, I had a colleague at work, we managed to get another grant where we brought in a professional, I forget what they call them, but anyway, we worked through a day I brought all the people at all ends of the supply chain, from the farmers, sheep farmers, to people who make finished products, and processors in between. We brought them all together for 2 days and closed them into a room and said, okay, let's see what we can figure out. And one of the things that came out of that was that, which I already knew, but it was great to get it documented. the supply chain here was broken in this country. So the bottleneck is the washing, scouring wool. If you do any value-added product, you've got to start there. So to do that, there's a couple other people in other parts of the country that have tried several times. And I've been involved in some of those efforts. But in the meantime, I decided to pivot to like, okay, what can I do with raw wool that we don't have to wash it? And what we came up with was agricultural products. Some kind, they are doing this in Europe. So I happened to be over there, and I was visiting family and discovered something. And they make not only a mulch, but they also make pellets, compressed wool into pellets.
For what purpose?
Fertilizer.
Well, for fertilizer.
So I managed to, the last few years I was at UVM, we did 4 trials at different farms around the state just to see how they performed. And I think it kind of blew all of us away. We didn't expect what we got. It was pretty amazing. So ever since then, I've been trying to raise money to do that here. But it's very expensive. We did a business plan. It looks like we need about $1 million to make it happen. So.
I think wool stuffed mattresses might be
right up there.
It might be cheaper.
It might be. It just might be. I don't know. So anyway, we're waiting to hear. We've applied for a grant from the state to see if we can get at least a start. They aren't going to give us $1 million by any means. But we'll just see if we can get a start. And if we can, we hear pretty soon, actually, and then we move forward. Yeah. Yeah.
You've given a very nice talk on the impact of grazing on climate change. Of course, the other side of the coin is the impact of climate change on grazing, the process of adaptation. You've given some nice examples of solar panels and maybe some trees. As a scientist, do you have sort of general principles for adaptation of grazing to essentially respond to the changes that are happening and continue to happen? What are the general principles should we think about in terms of adaptation of animal husbandry and grazing?
Yeah, so, one thing that we do see happening, which will be helpful, is that grazing can absorb so much water. So that's going to be a pretty important piece, I think, because these torrential events, precipitation events, are going to probably keep happening, at least for a while. So by having the ground covered and with grazing, if you do it properly, you can develop really deep roots. That's going to absorb a lot of water. The problem I do see happening, though, as it gets warmer, is the species of vegetation is going to change. And one of the things that we did do a few years ago, and there's a lot more, this woman who, I had her come to Vermont to teach, I asked her to come and teach me how to do this, and she spent like 2 weeks here, and we traveled around the state teaching other personnel. She figured out a way to train livestock to eat a lot of weeds. Everyone was always trying to plow up their fields and plant these, idyllic pastures of clover and, rye. And actually, there's so much protein and nutrients in, in other plants. And I think one of the funny stories I heard was a farmer saying that he spent so much money and he made all this beautiful pasture. And it was it bordered a roadside. And when he turned his cows into it, they walked right past it and they went to the edge where the chervil was and chowed down on the chervil. And they were probably getting something, that plant was bringing up nutrients of some sort that they needed. And what happens is that when the animals start doing this, they learn more and more what plants. So there's a book back there called Shepherding, and in France they do what they call transhumance. So they move around, and they have a whole science of how they they go to this region first before they take the animals to there, because the plants there, the animals need those first before they eat those plants. And there's a whole science to how they, and they have poems that they recite and teach the next generation, so you learn the routes that you have to take through the mountains so they eat the right plants. But animals know what they need. You know, we kept trying to put them on these places and saying, you have to eat this, and you know, that's not what they want. And I saw it again, you know, more than because of their own animals. You know, they'll, what I thought was great, and I'm sure you guys do too, you know, you think it's great pasture, and you put them in there, and they just stand there and look at you, and it's like, no, this is not what I wanted. But once they learn to eat what we call weeds, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, they'll eat everything. If you just, you know, once you teach them, they're on it. And yeah. Yeah.
So there's chervil. What other kinds of invasive exotics do they like?
Japanese knotweed.
When it's small.
When it's small.
We all like it. It's small.
But yes, I live along the North Branch, and I used to graze my sheep right down to, you know, there's knotweed all along the edge of that. They ate it.
So do they eat the ticks on them too?
Good question. I don't know. But yeah, they'll eat chervil, multiflora rose. I've seen goats just decimate multiflora rose. Burdock.
Bishop's weed?
Bishop's weed.
I see you showing your future.
Yeah, there's a lot of invasives.
A lot of invasives, yep. There's a lot of vitamins, nutrients, you know, yeah.
Jumping worms?
I do. I had a colleague, he had a photograph. No, I'm not kidding. He had a photograph of a dairy cow eating a rabbit. Oh! And he said that cow needed some protein.
Phosphorus.
Oh, they're phosphorus, that's right. And Fred Provenza did all the work with out in Utah. He found these, was it goats? I think it was goats. The goats, there was these, I forget what is it a marmot that lives in the holes out there? Yeah, I think it's a marmot. Anyway, outside their hole, their den, they pile up dead grass and debris, and they pee on it. And he found that goats that had started out in that area, that's where they would go and eat that because it had protein. It's nitrogen. And that's what they would eat. And he would put them on a pasture. They wanted that, this old dried grass that was soaked with peas.
Bison and prairie dog column, the same story.
Yeah.
The best breath freshener.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something about this question on climate adaptation from grazing. And one of the great things about grazing is that it is actually, it spans, natural grazing systems span a wide range of climates. And so it's not people who are really pessimistic worry about things like sugar maple being driven out of Vermont by climate change further north. And it is true that the grasses that thrive in Vermont might no longer thrive here, but there are others that would. So grazing is in some ways pretty robust to climate change in the system. It actually works in a lot of different climates. The downside of that is this last year, it was interesting to me looking around, but their grazing systems really suffered in the heavy rain. And the corn actually did, other than the corn that was literally flooded and died, the rest of the corn actually did okay. And it's kind of interesting. The corn, of course, has been bred to live on all the fertilizer you put on it and to be really in a high production system, high input system. You give it the inputs and it grows. It actually didn't do too badly. Of course, the crop fields are on the better soils throughout the state anyway. So they're the areas that are more robust, and grazing systems are generally speaking relegated to poor, more marginal areas that may have had something to do with it. But it was surprising to me actually that this last year that some of the cropping systems weren't as badly impacted as the grazing systems. But generally speaking, grazing is not going to go away. Climate change is not going to kill grazing, pretty much anywhere. But in some places it might, but not here. It'll just be different.
Yeah, it'll be different. I mean, that's the great thing about it is it's so flexible. One of the things that, kind of is interesting when you think about it, like, the way our seasons go, the time that we're feeding stored feed, hay is in the winter, but in the south, it's in the middle of the summer because all their vegetation just stops growing. So that's when they're feeding their stored feed, and then during the winter, things are really growing in the south, so that's when they're grazing. So it has tremendous flexibility, as Bruce said. I mean, it's so adaptable to just about anywhere. Any other questions?
Did the not go away?
No. But, I mean, it does set it back. And, it would take repeated. But so does, one of the few programs that you have in the state, if you do try to get rid of it, I think you can get money like for 1 year, and they cut the stems and then you paint it with the Roundup. That's the other option, but you got to keep doing that too. Yes. So, yeah.
So you're back to the question of sheep and coyotes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a concern. So it's one of the things that's been problematic and the biggest challenge of trying to figure out how we're going to do this. So the solution we've come up with, if we get this funding to do this in the ski area this coming summer, because I was pretty adamant that we don't use dogs because people are hiking there, and guard dogs, you just can't trust it where there's a lot of human traffic. So the solution we've come up with is that they'll be out during the day with these collars, and we'll be able to track where they are. But at the night time, we're going to bring them into an enclosure, which is kind of what they do in a lot of, like in the mountains over in Europe, where they have wolves they have to deal with. And that's pretty much what they do. They use guard dogs, and they bring them into an enclosure at night.
In Texas, they use donkeys or mules.
Yeah.
Llamas also.
And llamas, yeah. Yep. Donkeys are pretty effective. Llamas are a little bit more unpredictable. But you get another crop from them too. So. But I know a lot of people have used donkeys and had good luck with them. And the nice thing about that is that they can graze too. And out west, they do use the big guard dogs. I don't know, there's a famous documentary movie about a family who, it was their last, I think they were 7 generations, but it was their last trip. It followed them for a year. And so they lay them in the valley down at the farm, and then as soon as the grazing's ready, they go up, and they had like 5,000 sheep, and they have about 10 guard dogs and then herding dogs. And it just showed them going up into the mountains, and they spend the summer up there. And it's just with the dogs. But yeah, guard dogs are, I've had a few of them, so some are really good and some are.
So my experience our experience with sheep is that it's important to have well-trained coyotes. What I mean by that is quite simple, is that if the coyote population in your area is stable and they've learned to avoid, I've watched coyotes walk past our sheep in the middle of the day and they totally ignore each other. The sheep ignore the coyote ignores the sheep, which tells you that they know each other and they know that nothing's going to happen either direction. The coyotes were out looking for whatever they're looking for, and the sheep was not it. When you have that situation and you have a stable coyote population, they basically leave each other alone. you go out and shoot all the coyotes, pretty soon you get some new coyote in that doesn't know this and will attack your. So the best thing to do is to leave the coyotes alone.
I'll never forget 2 mules attacking my dog as I was horseback riding across the pasture. It was impressive. They were really on it. It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I could see them having fun with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say they've become the more popular way to have an animal in with sheep.
Yeah.
That really, works. Yeah. Any other questions?
Kim, thank you very much. Thank you.